The following program is an independent production, apart from DJDP Productions. The views, opinions, and ideas of the producers of The Darkest Hour do not necessarily reflect those of the staff of DJDP Productions, its partners or affiliates. The producers of The Darkest Hour with Amanda Jane of Forget Me Not assume all responsibility for the content of its program. Should you have questions or concerns regarding The Darkest Hour with Amanda Jane, please contact the producers directly. Or you may also contact the staff at Neo Retro FM through email at djdphoenix@protonmail.com. Be sure to include the date of the program and the subject matter you're inquiring about. And now, Neo Retro FM presents The Darkest Hour with Amanda Jane, streamed live from Marysville, Washington.
For tomorrow, we embark on the darkest hour.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to The Darkest Hour. I'm your host, Amanda Jane. Sometimes the things that we see scare us, but sometimes we can't see the things that are scaring us. I'm not sure which one is more frightening, but luckily, I've got both for you, and then some. So, let's get started, shall we? For reasons that will soon be clear, my story has only been told to a handful of people. Even the few people I've confided in, it's been met with underlying skepticism. And the only evidence I have to support my story are the 2 years of medical records and medical bills that accumulated while in treatment for the radiation poisoning I received that night. Years ago, I attended a house party my friend was hosting over winter vacation. His dad worked for Boeing and was out of town on business, in a state too far away for him to catch wind of our get-together. But what we didn't take into consideration was how the families living to the left and the right would feel about our small gathering of friends. As it would turn out, his neighbors didn't care much for a pack of wasted, ignorant teens playing loud music and beer pong in the backyard on a Tuesday. This was obvious when promptly at 2 a.m., 3 undercover police SUVs rolled into my friend's cul-de-sac with their lights on, parking in a V-shape to block the cars that were parked in the driveway, before starting to get out with their flashlights on. Thankfully, just moments before they hit the cul-de-sac, one of our classmates had climbed on the roof and was beginning to make a declaration of love to the mass of drunken onlookers cheering from below. When mid-speech, he glances over his shoulder, then spins around, almost losing his balance, and yells, "Cops!" I watch as that one word incites the same response in this group of people as yelling fire in a crowded theater would. What was once controlled chaos, confined to my friend's backyard, had now spilled into the streets of his neighborhood. It was like rats in a building demolition. Mayhem is the only way I can describe it. At this point, I myself am quite intoxicated, but begin to think I should probably start running. Statistically speaking, my chances of escape were very good. It was all of 3 cops and about 50 kids that were scattering in all directions. I do a mad dash to the tall wooden fence that separates the adjoining backyards, left of the house. Just as my hands grasp the white slats of the fence, almost in tandem, I feel a forearm wrap around my neck. Now my body being ripped backwards, sending me hard into the cold, wet grass of my friend's backyard.
Got one. Hey, got one.
The cop sort of shouts as he puts handcuffs on me and pulls me back up to my feet. I can see that he's an older, heavy-set man who looks winded. He's smiling from ear to ear, looking at me while continuing to regain the oxygen in his lungs. He says,
"You're the first kid I've ever caught in all my years of
breaking up these house parties." He proudly walks me past the other police officer who's talking to my friend whose house party it was. We make a defeated, sorrowful eye contact as I'm being led away, each curious to what the other's fate would be. Before the cop sits me in the back seat, the adrenaline and excess of alcohol all come to a head now. I'm puking. I hear the cop laughing in between my heaves. Then, when it seems like I've evacuated everything from my stomach, the cop handcuffs me, retrieves a small plastic bag from the front seat, handing it to me saying,
"If you're gonna do that again, please
try to get it in this." Then he sits me back and shuts the door. By the time he's made it to the driver's seat and started the car, I'm halfway to filling up the plastic bag to maximum capacity. The cop asks where I live because he's going to drive me home and talk to my parents. I managed to tell him the name of the apartment complex near my house before going back to test the bag's limits. That's where my older brother lived with his girlfriend. This would be better, I thought, even if it was 2 a.m. It was better than going directly to my mom. The cop types the apartment name into his GPS and pulls away from my friend's house, leaving the other 2 SUVs in a now desolate cul-de-sac. From my friend's house to the apartment is about a 15-minute drive, but I don't think I or the bag will make it that long. I mention my fears to the cop and he pulls over. Turns around, looks at me through the metal caging that separates us and says,
"If you mess up my ride, you're gonna have a lot more than your parents
to worry about, kid." Then he gets out, walks around to open my door. With impeccable timing, too. Immediately after my door swings open, my insides take a turn for the worst, and as I fall out of the back seat, I begin to expel gallons of puke on the sidewalk. I remember the cop was even a little impressed with the sheer amount of liquid leaving my body. I use the frosty pavement under my hands and knees to balance my body weight so not to fall into the puddle that I've created beneath me. It's in the midst of this that I devise a brilliant plan to get myself out of this mess. At least step 1 of the plan. I'll figure out step 2 after step 1, I thought. Step 1, run away from the cop. To put this in motion, I slowly stand up, and when the cop reaches for my arm to put me back in the Jeep, I hunch over and pretend like I'm going to start puking again. When the cop takes his first step backwards, cautious to avoid the spray, my feet act like lightning. I juke past him, looking like a D1 quarterback with no open receivers. He tries to grab for me, but he can't get a hold of any fabric. I'm too quick. I make a beeline toward the park located across the street from where we pulled over. In his pursuit, the cop's foot slips into what I can only imagine was the gutter or drain near the curb, and I hear the sickening sound of bone snap, along with his walkie-talkie bouncing off of the concrete. He lets out a scream in agony. Turning around, only now I see that he's on the ground, and possibly his leg is in a misshapen L. I felt awful, but also I didn't have time to look and see for sure. Then, any remorse I felt was quickly extinguished when the cop starts to yell,
"I'm going to f***ing kill you! Kill you!"
He was shouting this on repeat until I reached the area of trees that led into the park, about 100 yards away from where I left him. After a bit of time, I was confident I was fully immersed in the vast shadow of nature at night. I found a tree with a low enough branch so that I could climb the thing. I decided that this would be part 2 of my plan. Hide in the trees until this blows over. I know it'll be just a matter of minutes before the cop is able to drag himself to his walkie-talkie and request assistance. I'm sure they'll check the area first, and then they'll continue their search elsewhere when they don't find me. that's when I'll hop down and walk home. Like clockwork, I hear police sirens wailing in the distance and then growing closer. Currently, I'm straddling a branch 15 feet above the ground with my back against the tree. With this vantage point, I watch 4 flashlights enter the tree line and shine everywhere except up. Nobody ever looks up. I lean back and watch the police search the woods until they eventually give up. One of the police officers radios that they're still looking for me, but are going to resume their search down the other blocks near the park. That was the golden star comment I was looking for to confirm that my plan was an overwhelming success. Trying not to jump the gun on my daring escape, I hold my position until the color of police lights and the noise of cop banter have faded into nothingness. Sitting amongst the treetops, I wondered how many bugs have refuge in my hair at this point while I shared this branch with them. I also contemplated which route home would give me the least amount of time walking on the actual roads like a sitting duck. The park trails stretched for miles in all directions, intersecting with interurban bike trails that led out to actual streets and sidewalks, with plenty of markers to direct you where you're going. Under the belief that walking the trails would also grant me with the best camouflage for the longest duration of my trip, I began to reach out for the first branch of many on my descent to the ground. When out of the corner of my eye, I noticed 2 flashlights returning to the forest. But this time the lights sweeping the trees aren't white like before. They're a deep blue and much stronger, resembling like a thick laser pointer cutting through the black. Suspended 15 feet in the air, I'm balancing in between 2 branches now, desperately trying not to shift my body weight and make the tree creak, silently praying that these blue beams don't find their way up. Trailing these spotlights are, at the time, what I believe to be police in advanced SWAT suits. Their gear was decorated in glowing buttons and patterns that I'd never seen before. If they sent these guys out looking for me, the cop that broke something must be really hurt. The blue beams never tilt up and continue under me, along with the 2 glowing figures. Relief washes over me, and in that moment I truly believed if hide-and-seek was a sport, I probably could have gone pro. I just outsmarted the whole police force, basically. I then start to realize these 2 SWAT cops aren't moving like they're searching for someone. They're casually walking in a straight line, with a specific destination in mind. That's strange, I thought. If they're not looking for me, why are these 2 RoboCop guys out here? Was it the military? After that somewhat close call, I chose to sit back down on the branch I was originally on and waited out for a while, and looking out for any more blue laser beams combing the trees. Only a couple of minutes passed when I'm again put on high alert. This time, it's by a noise that sounds like a low bell. I feel the vibrations shake through the trees around me, and it sounded like it came from the direction that those 2 RoboCops went. After a second low gong is sent rippling through the woods, the forest is lit up with a blinding white light. Somehow this light has enough force to tear me off of the branch that I was perched, sending me to the grass, knocking the wind out of me when I landed. Fading in and out of consciousness, the last thing I remember was the lights that illuminated the forest. They began to rise vertically above the trees. The next time I opened my eyes, I was still where I had fallen, looking up at the branches above me. I'm lucky I didn't break my neck with that fall. It's now basically morning time with birds chirping. I attempt to pick up my bruised and hungover body while brushing pine needles off of my clothes. As sick as I felt, I remember still being able to appreciate the beautiful sunrise as I began the journey home. My room's located on the bottom floor, so I've been able to exit and enter through my bedroom window without my parents becoming none the wiser. My clock now says 5:52. My mom's alarm goes off at 7 to get ready for work. I crawl back into bed and try to sleep a little bit more before her alarm goes off. And I have to act like a functioning human as to not raise any suspicions of my night. When I wake up from my nap, I feel awful. This is the worst hangover I've ever had. My skin feels sunburnt. The pain is so overwhelming that I eventually have to admit to my mom that I can't get out of bed. I tell her only about the drinking, and she gives me a lecture about my future, but also takes pity on my pain, letting me rest. All day, I'm held up in bed, aside from the frequent trips to the bathroom where every orifice of mine was leaking. When my mom returns home from work, she sees that my wellness has declined, and she's worried that it's something more than a hangover. She asks if my friends had the flu or if I ate anything bad at the party. I didn't recall any of my friends showing up sick, and the only snacks provided were chips and alcohol, so my mom and I agree if I continue to feel this way the next day that she's going to take me to the doctor, no questions asked. The next day, when I heard my mom's alarm go off, I knew my symptoms had worsened. So much to the point where I could barely move. I felt very weak. Removing the covers, painful blisters were forming on my arms and chest. When my mom came in to check on me, the sight of my blisters obviously sends her into a panic. She runs to call in sick for work, looking for her car keys so that we can go to the emergency room. As I sit up, I see clumps of my hair had fallen out onto the pillow. My mom races into the room to help me get ready to go, but I'm still fully dressed, wearing the clothes that I had on 2 days ago from the party. I hadn't had the strength to get undressed before I hit bed. This sad truth was a blessing, though, because now I didn't have to slide a t-shirt over these swelling blisters. While at the hospital, the doctors do all sorts of blood tests on me and try to make a diagnosis to my ailments. After hours of sitting in a small room, waiting to hear the test results, a doctor knocks on the door and comes in with a clipboard filled with papers. She first asks me if I've ever had any sort of cancer or radiation treatment, to which I say no. Then she asks if I've recently been in contact with any sort of waste material, nuclear waste. Thinking that the doctor's making some sort of joke, I sort of laughed, but I say no. She doesn't laugh along with me, though. Her face remains stoic as she examines the clipboard again. After a brief pause, the doctor informs me that my test results show high levels of ionized radiation poisoning. She's only seen these numbers in patients doing chemotherapy. I hear my mom break out into hysterics, asking if I'm going to die, and me sort of wondering the same thing, questioning how did I get radiation poisoning. The doctor discussed options for treating this. I wasn't going to die. It would consist of a lot of vitamins and supplements, and the biggest part being that it wouldn't be quick and wouldn't be cheap. But she didn't have answers for how I could have been exposed to this. She kept saying, unless under extreme isolated situations, she's never seen someone randomly get radiation poisoning. On the way back home, I stared out the window, wishing I could tell my mom what happened the other night, but with how everything transpired, with the police, I couldn't divulge why I was hiding in the trees. And having no real answers of my own, I never told her my theories on the light that propelled me out of the trees before flying away. I used to live at the North Sound RV Park in Linwood, Washington. If you've ever driven by it, you'd notice it's the one that always has the dance hall sign in front, lit up. The RV I lived in was behind the dance hall. One night, not sure exactly when, but I'd lived there about a month. It was super cold, so wintertime. Not Christmas, since it wasn't all lit up. But either way, it was late, and aside from the lamp that I was using at my desk, it was relatively dark inside my RV. I was working on a new drawing when suddenly I felt I was being watched. As a natural reflex, I jolted around, and when I did, I saw a dark, full-bodied shadow thing standing in the corner near the back bedroom, where a shadow shouldn't be. I couldn't see any eyes, but somehow I knew it was what I felt watching me. I looked away only for a split second to reach for my phone. Pulling up the camera to hit record, I was sure that I'd done it quick enough despite being really scared. But it was gone by the time my camera was recording. Standing there, I was looking in the same corner. It was obvious that with the absence of a shadow, there had definitely been a shadow there. I looked around the RV and outside all the windows. With no explanation for myself and not really feeling like drawing anymore, I decided I'd step outside, turn on all the lights, drink my tea, and shake this feeling before calling it a night. As I was about to open the front door, there was the sound of cupboards opening in the back bedroom. It was so clear, I moved away from the door and went back there. I saw that nothing was open even before entering the room, and once inside, I see no disturbances. Just as soon as I'm turning to look out the bedroom windows, I hear what sounds like footsteps running away from the room, and then someone closing the front door of the RV, like they were leaving. I heard all of this, but I saw absolutely nothing. The door, it didn't actually move. It just sounded like it had. I scrambled to the windows on the sides. Of course, I saw nothing again. But I started to think that I should record whatever I could. Not sure where to face the camera because I still hadn't actually seen anything outside. I set it on the front dash facing outside the windshield. This next part explains the attachment that I sent you. The rest of the night, off and on, I heard weird noises around my RV. I tried to make the least amount of noise as possible because I knew that when I listened to my recordings, I would want the least amount of disturbance. Wrapped in my blanket, with the lights off and all of the curtains open, I just sat on the small couch in between the front door and the kitchenette. I began scoping the outside area calmly but diligently with my eyes. Literally no one outside. The dance hall was closed. I saw no lights or activity there or anywhere. I looked over at the microwave, and it was the first time I'd realized it was almost 3 a.m. Then, the silence was broken by the sound of someone walking around the gravel perimeter of the RV. Round and round, steady pace, and something being scraped across the metal outside of the RV. I could also hear something, or things that I'd never heard before. And even after hearing them again and again on the recording, I still can't really compare it to anything I understand. So I'm following the steps with my eyes the whole time, but they aren't accompanied by a person or a shadow. The steps eventually get to the front, and I hear tapping on the thick windshield glass. But there's nothing outside. I'm looking straight through the glass and on the small screen of my phone. It's still recording, but I see nothing. Then, footsteps inside again. I run to grab my phone off the dash and chase the steps in the direction they were headed. Then they were behind me, headed in the opposite direction, each time disappearing when I arrived and reappearing somewhere I'd just been. I was making myself dizzy. I see nothing on this part of the footage either. Not that I was even really paying attention to focusing the camera at that point. There wasn't really anything to physically see anyways, so I'm really just holding it. And through all the noise, you can hear different footsteps, but it's really just me driving myself crazy at this point, trying to find this thing. I sat down finally, trying to get a grip. I kept the recording going, and I didn't really get much sleep that night. It was probably about 5:30 that I decided I had to get some sleep. My shift started at 10, so I stopped the recording and eventually fell asleep. After listening through the footage, the whole ordeal was probably about an hour. The remaining hour and a half of the video was uneventful in a good way. No other experiences after that one. Although the majority of the time I continued to live at the RV park, I was in a different trailer on the other side of the dance hall. Still, I'll never forget that experience, and I have no idea what it was, which is what scares me the most, I think.
Why, Grandma, what big eyes you have.
Ha ha ha! All the better to see you with, my dear.
And Grandma, what big ears you have.
Oh, all the better to hear these commercial breaks.
Grandma.
Neo Retro FM, live from Olympia, Washington. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Modern music programming. NeoRetroFM.com. Hi everyone, Amanda Jane here. Taking a moment to talk to you about something my husband Ryan and our band, Forget Me Not, are doing this summer. We're partnering with Foundation ESD and their Nourishing Network program to help families in need all summer. You can help support too. It just takes streaming our music all summer long as we continue to donate 100% proceeds to the foundation. Visit conductedbyforgetmenot.com for more information and join us in making No Student Hungry a reality. To learn more about the Foundation ESD and their various programs, please visit foundationesd.org or conductedbyforgetmenot.com.
And we return. Some of us, anyway. Ha 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 ha.
In the 5th grade, my best friend moved away. And just when all hope was lost that I'd never find a friend again, a new best friend moved to town. We'll call her Rita. We were inseparable. She lived in the houses right next to my apartments, and I remember Rita was one of the few kids that didn't make fun of me for living in apartments. She came from an environment that made her grow up fast, is what I would determine later in life, but at the time, I just thought she was a 5th grader who had a lot of freedom. Rita was in most regards much more advanced than me. She had been keen on sneaking out, kissing boys, drinking alcohol, just to name a few things, and she was just as happy to show me the ropes as I was to climb them. That summer, my parents let me ride a ferry across the Sound to Vashon Island, where Rita had moved from. It's where her mom had still lived. She currently lived with her sister's dad and his wife, who rode the ferry with us since Rita's mom didn't drive and wouldn't be able to pick us up at the terminal. Off of the ferry, we continued down a long, somewhat windy highway, passing through what Rita said was the actual town of Vashon. "That's where we'll go tomorrow," she whispered while pointing at some shops. When she said this, I assumed we were close to her house, since we'd likely be walking to these shops. Nope. The drive seemed to continue forever, the houses becoming more spread apart, less visible from the road. We had gone from ocean views to being in a forest. Finally, we pulled up to a gravel driveway, off the road and down towards a large but structurally unsound home. The adults went inside to talk to Rita's mom. I could see her sister's dad hand her mom a piece of paper with my parents' contact information. And then I was interrupted by Rita, who was eager to show me around. I had one moment of being homesick, and then I brushed it off when Rita said there was a small creek that we could go to and swim. My favorite thing to do. Before we took off, I was told by the adults to use the phone inside and call my parents, let them know I'd made it safely. I walked in the house and could see that it was very messy and smelled unusual. I instantly wondered where we would sleep, as there was really no space. I could also see that there were 2 kids living there, in the only bedroom that the house had to offer. And the bed in the living room was where Rita's mom stayed, as she put it. We said goodbye to the other adults, and I went to call my parents. After getting off the phone, I was told that we weren't sleeping inside, that we couldn't, because the kids living there had head lice. I was a very polite kid and never let on that any of this was troublesome for me. Instead, I suggested we build a tent outside and camp for the weekend. There was no way I was getting head lice. In hindsight, I have no idea how much my parents actually knew about Rita's situation, meaning that she only lived with her older sister's father because she couldn't live with her mother any longer. She told me it was medical issues, and I'd come to find out that that was true, but her mom also had recreational habits that made it hard for her to take care of Rita. There was zero supervision. And if my parents actually knew that, no way I'd been given the okay to take the trip. So fast forward to the part where I realized there's zero adult supervision or parental guidance. As I mentioned before, Rita's mom didn't drive, but Rita thought her uncle would be around to use the truck parked in front of the house to take us to town. I remember Rita and her mom screaming at each other, fighting about this and that. The end result being that the truck was broken down, there was no uncle, we weren't going to town. Her mom actually locked us out of the house that night, where we sat outside in our makeshift teepee and devised a plan for the next day. All of my ideas were shot down as there was no bus, there were no adults or working cars around us. We couldn't use any phones. It was 1999 when not every kid had a cell phone. I had this old, no longer connected Nokia. A cousin had let me have it to play Snake or whatever other games were on there. One time I called 911 and it actually worked, which I wasn't expecting. Got super scared, turned it off, and never really turned it on again, but always carried it with me. Even if it did work, Rita said it didn't matter, that there was no one to call, so we would just have to hitchhike. Now, I had gone along with a lot of bad ideas, resulting in a relatively good time with Rita up to this moment because, honestly, I thought she was cool. And I felt pretty invincible hanging out with her. But one of my biggest fears growing up was being kidnapped. I don't know if it was the 90s or if it's an all the time kind of thing, but we were constantly being told someone was going to take us. To never get into a van, don't talk to strangers was parenting 101 back then. All we knew was stranger danger, didn't we? I pleaded with Rita that we find another way, saying that I would walk with her. She told me it was impossible, that we wouldn't get to town until sundown, and we'd have to walk home in the dark. We'll just hitch a ride to town. Anyone driving on this road is going to town anyways. Then if we have to walk the whole way back, at least it won't be in the dark. We can grab some bathing suits from the little store that I showed you, she meant steal, and go to the pool. She really knew how to get me to agree to something. She finished it off with some comforting words that this was a nice small town, friendly, old-fashioned. The next morning, I secretly hoped her mom wouldn't let us take the journey, but she really didn't care, telling us we better find something to eat in town because she wasn't feeding Rita with that attitude. I sort of sighed. I loved food, and I knew my parents hadn't given me enough cash to sustain 3 meals a day and buy the souvenirs I wanted. So we were off to hitchhike. We stood about a half a mile away from her driveway, across the street, where part of the road had a turnoff. It seemed like an eternity before we even saw a car pass on the highway, not even going the direction that we needed. I suggested we start walking, maybe make our way to town while we wait for a ride. Just as she was about to agree with me, we see an old truck start to come towards us, heading in the direction that we need. As it got closer and started to stop, I could tell that Rita was excited. I was nervous. It was an older man driving this cream-colored Toyota with a brown faded stripe on the side and a brown canopy. And as this man's truck stopped, so did my heart. I never actually anticipated someone stopping. I feared it. The man goes to roll his window down, while Rita runs over to his side of the truck and tells him where we need to go. I'm standing towards the back of the truck, looking inside the canopy, where I can see an aggressive amount of empty beer cans. Could be that they were old, or maybe he recycled. I tried to reassure myself. I can hear this old guy basically flirting with Rita, calling her cutie, saying things like, "No problem, babe," and telling her we just need to hop in the back. Harmless, Rita tells me as she walks towards the back where I'm standing. She hops through the open window of the canopy. I wasn't so sure. Before hopping in the back to join my friend, I reached down and grabbed 3 good-sized rocks and put them in my bag. When I got in, I made sure to sit so that I could see the man's face, at least his eyes. He was asking questions like where we were from, what we were doing out here alone, how old we were. Most of it I wasn't paying attention, but I heard Rita lie about that one, saying we were 16, which he had to have known was a lie. We were barely 11 years old. I looked out the window, trying to distract myself further, with the view of the sun crossing through the trees as we drifted down the highway. Then, the man in a bit louder voice asked why I was being so quiet. As to not appear afraid, I just said, "Oh, I'm not quiet at all. I just get car sick sometimes. But don't worry, I won't mess up your truck or anything like that." He laughed. Then he asked Rita to hand him one of those beers, referring to an apparently full pack that Rita was sitting next to. She grabbed one for him, and then 2 others. "Can we have one too?" she asked the man. He agreed, and Rita cracked open a beer, putting another in her bag. At the time, I guess there wasn't too much to be worried about. We were passing things I'd seen on the way to Rita's house. My uncle had given me a sip of beer before, and I knew that people could be friendly in a small town. So I let my guard down, taking a sip of beer and handing it back to my friend. The man asked if we wanted to listen to music, and this resulted in Rita requesting TLC. The man said he'd never heard of them. I went on to explain who TLC was, then both Rita and I breaking out into our rendition of No Scrubs, before laughing ourselves backwards, laying on the bed of the truck for just a moment. Then, I see Rita lift herself up quickly and look out both windows. "Hey, where are you going?" "We just stay on the main highway and then there's town, remember? The shopping center?" "Oh yeah, of course, girlie. I'm taking the scenic route. It's a bit longer, but it's got the best views. You've seen it before, I'm sure. You said you live around here, right?" I had never seen my friend look afraid. Not when we got caught sneaking out of her house, not when we were brought home by the police, not when her mom yelled in her face earlier, and not ever at school. No matter how mean the kids were, she was fearless in my eyes. When people made fun of her for essentially being a kid, telling her to shave her mustache, calling me fat or apartment kid, whatever that meant, I'd want to cry and she'd come right up front yelling back things like, "Suck my toe," and whatever else, and then laughing, running off with me. Recess teachers putting her on the fence, fearless. But right now, she was afraid. She mouthed to me and barely whispered, "This isn't the way to town." Then, checking to see if the guy was looking at us, he wasn't. With fear still in her eyes, she looks at me, saying very quietly, "This is the wrong way." I lean forward, send my eyes toward the man, tapping on the glass. "Hey, sir, we really need to get to town. We need to be there soon. We're meeting somebody." He looks back at us through the rear view and doesn't say anything right away, just keeps staring, before looking forward and saying, "No, you're not," as he took another turn off to a new road and continued with, "It's just you two out here, remember?" He laughed, but it wasn't playful. It was evil. No. Why did she tell him anything about us? I thought to myself. "Now you two just sit back, okay? We'll be there in no time." As he said this, I looked at my friend and whispered, "What else did you tell him?" She lays down, as to be out of view of the man. "Nothing. I said that it was us two going shopping and swimming. Our parents would pick us up later. They didn't mind if we caught a ride with a local." Okay, this wasn't the worst, I thought. For all he knows, later is very soon, or maybe we had a friend that would notice we weren't at the pool. The man started to whistle, and he was looking at me through the mirror. And he just kept whistling. Rita sat up, shot him a look. She was breathing heavily, and the man just kept whistling. I could see Rita start to get riled up, and I knew I couldn't let her start mouthing off to the guy. He was old, but could easily overpower us. He wasn't afraid of us. I'd never been so scared in my life, but I needed him to be afraid. So without even having a real plan, I reach inside my bag to grab the rocks, and I feel my phone. Oh my God, my phone. And as I'm thinking about that one time I called 911 and it actually worked, I feel a sense of hope sweep over my body. Oh no. The phone doesn't turn on. It's completely dead. But he doesn't know that. I grab the phone from my bag, Rita making eye contact with me, and I just try to convey without words, follow my lead. With the phone now out of my bag, I pretend to press some buttons before holding it to my ear. This was my moment. If I never made it to the big stage or Hollywood, who cares? I was about to put on a performance, not of a lifetime, but hopefully to save my life. So, being in a situation that I've always dreaded being in, I imagined I was in a Lifetime movie, something I'd actually always wanted to be in. I looked at the man while saying through the phone, "Hey, Dad, do you think you could meet us?" I held the phone down for a minute and said to Rita, "What's this place, this street called?" And then I moved my gaze to the man. "Excuse me, sir. My dad can just pick us up from here if you don't mind letting us out. Like I said, we have to meet somebody." I pause for a minute, but he doesn't say anything. Then, he makes eye contact through the rearview mirror. "What did you say this route was called?" I continued. And I could tell he was surprised to see that I had a cell phone. He started to pull off to the side of the road. And I continued to pretend to talk to my dad. "Well, sorry, he hasn't told me the name yet. You know I don't know streets." The man's truck is pulled over completely now. And from my friend, I hear, "Maury Island, tell your dad Maury Island." So I repeat that back into the phone. I can see that the man is turning the truck around now, pretending not to hear us ask him questions. "Sir, were you gonna pull over?" He sort of stammers his words at first. "Hey, girls, it looks like I got turned around back here. So," and he looks in the mirror, sees that I'm still on the phone. "I'll get you to town. I'll just head back over this way, no worries." He was the one that sounded worried now. "Awesome. Did you hear that, Dad? We're headed to town. Can you meet us at the shopping center? Rita still needs a suit." I let a long pause go by. "Dad, I know, but we didn't want to wake you up before work, so we figured we'd get a ride in. He's a nice man. I'm sure he'll tell you we didn't do anything wrong." I was on a roll right now. This guy was sweating. "Yes, okay, we'll hurry. Yeah, a cream-colored truck. Brown top. Love you, bye." As I end the call with my fake dad, I tell Rita the fake plan. Loud enough for the guy to still hear. Then quieter, I ask, "Is he going the right way now?" She nods that yes, he is. And for the first time in a long time, the fear has left her face. Now she has a smile. I smirk, but don't smile yet. The rest of the ride is quiet, and as we approach town, I see the man grow paranoid. He whips past the shopping mall, and as I go to grab the phone again, I realize he's pulling behind a small grocery store. "Okay, girls, you gotta get out here, right now. Gotta get out. Go on, get out." Rita and I run towards the back and start to climb out. Before both of our hands are even off of the back of the truck, it rips away. The man peeling out of the parking lot and back onto the highway, headed the direction he'd come. Much faster this time. I let out a giant exhale, realizing how close I'd just come to being another statistic. How close I was to never seeing my actual parents ever again. I felt so many things, but then all I could hear was Rita, laughing and praising me, thanking me and telling me how cool I was, how badass that was. I welcomed the distraction and the praise for a while, but I made her pinky promise that we would just walk home and not take another ride from another stranger. She swore, and even though I couldn't believe our close call, we still found a way to enjoy the rest of the day. Stealing ourselves some bathing suits and cigarettes, which I'd never actually smoked, being that I was in 5th grade. We walked over to some woods where we coughed a bunch and thought we were pretty cool with these Virginia Slims. After making ourselves sick, we decided to head over to the pool. Lucky for us, Rita really did see somebody that she knew. Someone who lived not as far as Rita, but someone she trusted, who had brothers our age at the pool. The girl ended up driving us basically halfway back to Rita's, and we walked the rest of the way, singing Beastie Boys and TLC, trying not to panic every time a car would pass, jokingly swinging our bags of rocks, as to fend off any more bad guys, but also ducking behind a bush or a hill if it looked like it was a truck that was coming. Finally, just before sunset, we made it to the familiar gravel driveway. Rita went to see if the front door was unlocked, and it was. Apparently, she told her mom everything that had happened, and I guess it was enough to get them on good terms again. They ended up on bad terms by the end of the night, but at least we got dinner first. I wish the nightmare ended there, but it wouldn't end until the next day. We spent the night scaring each other, telling scary stories, and then pretending that something was in the woods until we started to believe it. So after a horrible night's sleep, we woke up, and Rita said she would take me to the creek where we hadn't been yet. She said it wasn't far, just down the hill behind her house. She was being honest. We had a great time, and the creek wasn't far. We started to get hungry, so we raced back to the top of the hill. Neck and neck, we simultaneously trip over a giant log, just a few yards away from the house. Before we even hit the ground, we're surrounded by a swarm of buzzing and humming, followed by repeated stinging sensations all over. We instantly start running and screaming. We're making distance, but the buzzing is still surrounding us and the stinging has not stopped. I felt another on my hand and I screamed out as I heard Rita yelling for her mom. We get to the door, pounding and screaming. Her mom must have locked it again, but she opens it, and as she does, we rush in, and she screams in horror, closing the door, telling us to strip our clothes, and that these are wasps. They'll keep stinging repeatedly if we don't get them off. For the first time this whole trip, I see this woman act like a caretaker, collecting these stinging insects from our bodies with her bare hands and doing whatever she did with them. One by one, these things were leaving our clothing. I felt something dig into my temple. I screamed in pain. Immediately, she grabs a wasp from my face and crushes it on the ground, telling me to keep taking off my clothes. Finally, I'm down to just my underwear, and I can see at least 4 stings on my hand, and 2 more on my feet, of course the one throbbing on the side of my head. Rita walked away with just as many, the worst of hers being 2 on the upper lip. We sat there, trying to calm down, sipping ginger ale, as her mom made a mixture of water and baking soda, some sort of herb. She started to rub it on our wounds, and at first it stung horribly. Then, sweet relief. It finally didn't feel like my whole face was going to fall off, and I could start to move my hands. Her mom looks at me and says she's going to phone my parents so I can tell them what happened. I'm overwhelmed with joy. I just wanted a safe voice. And part of me just couldn't let go of the fact that I was going to die from these stings. I just needed my mom. After talking to my parents, I learned that a wasp sting wouldn't kill me. I also learned that I'm not even the one that's allergic to bees. It's my mom. I was reminded that the trip was almost over, and after tonight, I would be home. With that, I was able to rest easy that night in the woods. We didn't share scary stories that night, we just sort of laughed about the whole trip. Still being too young to really grasp all the danger we'd put ourselves in, and narrowly escaped. We were just happy to be alive, and I was happy to be headed back the next day. The trip home was a mix of emotions. We couldn't really tell anyone what happened. We knew we'd get in trouble, but that didn't stop Rita from continuing to try to get in trouble, even on the way back home. By the time we'd returned home, she was already grounded from being a technical brat the entire way. I didn't understand it all at the time, but in retrospect, Rita didn't want to leave her mom. Whatever their relationship was, that was her mom, and the only way she knew how to express her feelings was by acting out. I personally decided to chill out, just a little bit, not put myself in harm's way any chance I could. A natural result was Rita and I drifting apart, mainly because she was always grounded. And by the end of the summer, she would be deemed out of control, though I would argue misunderstood. Either way, the consequence being that she would move back to the island, and I wouldn't see my friend again until almost 15 years later, when we found each other on Facebook. I could see that by then, she'd made it off the island and had a family of her own. A couple of years ago, I ran into them at a local powwow. It was really nice to see each other as adults. Yes, she was a friend that I almost died with on several occasions. And yet she was also the friend who helped me find a voice, showed me that it was okay to be proud of who I was and where I came from. And for that, I'll always be grateful. I saw a thing I can't explain on 3 separate occasions now. I would have expected that if I did see something otherworldly, it might be something that someone had already seen before, or that I'd recognize from the movies. Might say something like, "Holy shit, that's a ghost," But this thing was so surreal and deranged looking that I'm really at a loss. My first sighting was in southern New Hampshire in 2001. I was in high school. It was well after midnight, and I was walking to a friend's house from the apartment complex I lived. To get from one place to another quickly, you had to cut through a small patch of forest, 150 yards. And it was technically somebody else's property. A couple of times, somebody had shined a light and even fired a shot in the air, trying to scare us, get us to stop cutting through. It didn't stop us, but we got stealthier. So on this night, I was creeping very quietly through the trees as I went. Once exiting the tree line, one would be standing on the side of the street. Houses across the street. The houses were spaced apart decently, so it was pretty dark except for the area directly around the houses and a street light on either end of the block. I stepped out from the forest onto the street, and it was in that exact moment that something caught my eye to the left of where I'd emerged. It stumbled awkwardly out of the woods and into view, right under the circular yellow glow, radiating down from one of the streetlights. For a brief moment, it looked like a shadow. However, as I focused, I could hear the sound of leaves and grass beneath its feet as it moved. I quickly realized this wasn't a shadow and that its body shape was that of a frail child, maybe 3 feet tall. Its arms and legs were very thin. It was dark, but from what I remember, at the end of its frail limbs were just nubs. Its movement was the creepiest part of all, though, and the first thing that threw me off. I can't even really explain how absurd or unnatural these movements were. Atop the frail body was an enlarged light bulb-shaped head and a bit of a belly in spite of how thin the rest of the frame was. In addition to its shapes and motions, the thing seemed unreal, mostly because it didn't reflect light. When it stepped into the light of the street lamp, it had no three-dimensional features. And I could only really tell that it had a solid form by the way that it moved and navigated the environment around it. I froze in place when I saw it, my brain unable to process what I was seeing. It sort of fumbled down toward the drain on the side of the road. I didn't think that I was moving or making noise, but as soon as it hit the curb, it rose up and looked at me. What happened next is what sent me fleeing into the woods. Upon seeing me, this malformed, shadow child thing did a quick twist turn, dropping down on all fours, and becoming a much more animal-like shape when it did. The thing had become something I can only describe as a dog, cat, shadow, bear. I know it sounds crazy, but I can't describe it any other way than that. It stood on all fours like a predatory animal, but I couldn't make out any definition from the way it didn't catch the light. This thing, it genuinely became something else as far as I could tell. Now, running at me, its eyes flashed yellow, and it let out a loud shriek. Not a growl or a bark, but a legitimate shriek. It sounded like neither person nor animal, rising quickly, almost as if it was winding up under pressure, and just painfully being forced out of this creature's mouth. I remember there was almost a scared vulnerability to the sound, which contrasted the harshness and the defensive stance the creature had taken. All this took place in just a few seconds, maybe 10, 20 at the most. From the time it exited the trees, the posture, shrieking at me running home. I did not stop. I didn't look back. I didn't try to be quiet through the forest. I just ran as fast as I could. Like I said, I saw it 2 more times in my life, but this was the best look I got at the thing. When I think back, what bothers me the most about these encounters is how unidentifiable the thing was. I can't say for sure I'll never see it again, but I have a feeling I haven't seen it for the last time. Welcome to the end of tonight's episode, and thank you for joining me. Be sure to join The Darkest Hour every Friday night at 11 p.m., only on neoretrofm.com. Do you have stories like these? I'd love to share them. send them to me. Amanda, darkesthour@gmail.com. Stay spooky.